Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So for today's video, I wanted to give you guys an update on what's happening with the screen mounts. Now, the bulk of this video that you're about to see was initially shot for Mike, Frugal Tesla Guy. He had asked me for a complete background and history on the screen mount, how I developed it, some of the iterations, prototypes as I went along, some of the challenges and struggles, as well as the features of the screen mount. So this was initially shot for Mike. He used a couple clips of it in a video, but I also wanted to post the complete video on my channel here so you guys can see what I went through and where we are at with the screen mounts as far as the order delay, features, everything related to them. So let's dig into it. All right, so this whole saga began, I'd say it was late August of 2019, and was driving around in my Model 3 and I realized I didn't like how vertical the screen was. It was a little bit too straight up, too high, and the press release photos that Tesla had given to us when we purchased the cars showed the screen lower and laid down flat against the dash and in a very sleek, almost center console type of look. And in an effort to emulate that, I pulled my screen off the dash and machined a mount that lowered it and angled it forward. Well, the viewers of my YouTube channel liked it, but said, well, can't you move it, angle it toward the driver? And so I went ahead and machined a mount that did that. And so I have some prototype mounts in front of you here, and I'll show you one finished mount. These were all handmade prototypes. Each one took probably somewhere between 10 and 14 hours each to make. They're pretty rough looking, but they give you an idea of the mounts and the progression. So in September of 2019, I dated each one of these. This is what I had come up with, which ultimately went into production as my version 1 mount. It was adjustable in that you could loosen 2 screws and move the screen from parallel with the dash to angled toward the driver. And I sold quite a few of these, a couple hundred of them, I think. And they were popular. Eventually, people started asking, well, can't you put a pivot in there and make it swing left and right? And so I began working on that. And my first pivoting mount, let's see here. I don't have the earliest prototype, but this is the earliest prototype. May of 2020, I came up with this. And you can see that it is very similar in style to my version 1 mount, with the key exception of the pivot at the top. I noticed early on that if you just make the screen pivot left and right, as you swing the screen toward you, it wants to dive behind the steering wheel. And that's the reason for the offset pivot, is to move the screen actually further away from the driver to get it to try to clear your line of sight behind the steering wheel. So this was May of 2020. Now, what's interesting about that date? Well, that was kind of right around COVID time. And COVID was changed a few things. I own a couple of small businesses, and one of my businesses requires traveling to people's homes. And COVID had slowed things down during that time. And so I began pushing these mounts heavily because I couldn't go into people's homes, or at least not for a temporary period of time. So we began promoting these mounts, giving them away to YouTubers to review, and the sales really went up. And it was shortly after that I was told by somebody in the industry that the Chinese were looking at copying, or were working on copying, my mount. And they initially started working on copying the version 1. I think they sold a few, and then saw my pivoting mount, which, and that was part of the whole thing with making this mount pivot. Was when COVID kicked in, I realized, and I was told that the Chinese were copying this mount, that I needed to come out with something else, rush it to market, and flood the market, because needed the business, to be honest with you. So, one other thing about this mount, you'll notice this component here. That is a wiring harness strain relief. As you swing the screen left and right, it puts a bending moment on the connector at the back of the screen, and a strain relief eliminates that. I finally, after a while, I realized that it can't wrap all the way around the wire harness because when you take the screen down, it's holding on. So I ultimately came out with the strain relief that you see on the production mounts, but this was the earliest version of it. I also realized at this point that the friction material, the polymer that takes the friction of the left-right movement, was very critical. This is a nylon plastic. Ultimately, we came up with a different polymer formula that works much better for that sweeping movement. And under this nut is a Belleville spring, which is a warped washer that acts like a spring, and a thrust bearing so when you move it left and right, it doesn't back up the packing nut at the top. So that was that mount. And then, so this was May of 2020. And let's see here. Shortly thereafter, I began looking at, well, I'd love to be able to change the pitch angle. I had a few people get in the car and say that they didn't like the angle. I leaned it forward 9 degrees beyond stock to give it a more sleek look. But depending on the height of the driver, they said, well, can you change the pitch angle? And so to that end, in December of 2020, I made this mount, which was just a modified version of these. And this U-shaped part here is just welded steel. You can see I offset it even further toward the passenger in an attempt to create a better line of sight from behind, keep the screen from going behind the steering wheel. And this mount worked wonderfully well. I had it in my car for quite some time, and very proud of this, but obviously it's kind of clunky. And this was purely a functional test prototype. Also, this mount, these steel circular areas here where this pivot shaft goes through, the pivot shaft is aluminum with an anti-wear coating on it. I don't know if it's not Teflon, but some kind of a coating. And to allow the aluminum to pivot inside the steel. And because that friction would normally gall the aluminum in the steel. And we'll get to that in a minute here. So ultimately, December of 2020, I made this mount. And then January, so 1 month later of 2021, this is the mount that I made. You can see it's very rough, was made mostly by hand, just hand machining, TIG welding, grinding to come up with this, what I would consider producible mount. Again, very rough, not CNC machined, just kind of made by hand. But a few things that I learned with this mount. Number one, I didn't need as much passenger side offset. Number two, I realized I needed friction material, and it's hard to see, but it's white in color. I needed friction material between the aluminum pivot and the aluminum clamps, and I knew I would need that, but I came up with that idea for this mount, as well as the releasing strain relief. So when you take the screen off of the mount, the harness drops right out of the strain relief. So this was pretty much ready to go into production, other than just prettying some things up. And this mount was sent to my machinist and in Southern Illinois, my machinist, Mark, and he began the process of CAD designing and modeling and then fixturing to produce this mount. Now, this mount went into production shortly thereafter, and I've sold quite a few, many hundreds of them. And these mounts, all of these up to this point, the decorative cover behind it was fabric, a padded fabric. And that padded fabric, and let me back up too. Where was it here? It was right about, it was probably, I believe, June or July of 2020 that the Chinese put their pivoting mount into production, and that frustrated me to a certain extent, and that was actually a big part of the reason that I went to the 2-axis mount, because I thought, well, people have a right to market products all they want, but I don't want to be copied. You know, come up with your own idea. So to that end, I decided to make the 2-axis mount and patent it, and that is patented now, and I'll put the patent number on the screen here. My patent was approved 8 months ago and six months ago, and then I was just given my patent number. So So all of these mounts, though, were covered with a padded fabric, what I call a sleeve, that wraps around and would allow, like the flexible boot on the shifter of a car, would allow the screen to move while still covering the mount. But every mount that I made added more and more movement and then both directions, and it became apparent that the fabric cover didn't have quite as much range of motion as the mount did. So people began asking me, is there a way to cover this mount with a hard plastic cover that looks OEM? So that takes us to the current Atlas mount. So let me move these out of the way and show you that here. We just put this mount into production. So this is my Atlas mount. Again, it's been patented. The name is trademarked. And we'll go ahead and open up the kit and show you here. So when you open up the kit, the first thing that you see is a 3D printed plastic. This is the lower cover, and it has mount points for both the old style Model 3 temp sensor and the Model Y, as well as new Model 3 temp sensor. So it's that component there. This is the mount itself. And you can see how close the production mount is to the prototype. Very close. So these are now anodized black for a number of reasons. The surface is harder wearing, but also when the plastic cover is installed, you can see a little bit of the metal parts between the upper and lower covers. So now we anodize the mounts black to hide that, to give it a more uniform look. And we have our own manufactured pivot bearings, our own proprietary polymer friction washer, and everything on this mount is 100% made in America, every single part. And all of the components to this are proprietary to me alone. The only thing I buy off the shelf really is are the thrust bearings and the nut at the top. Everything else, oh, and the screws. Everything else is proprietary and made specially for this kit. So that's the mount itself. And then the cover is comprised of the component I showed you before and two others. This is the component that goes in the dashboard. And that would cover the mount in this way. And it mounts up to the dash and snaps into the large rectangular hole within the dashboard itself. And then lastly, this component here, and this component mounts to the back of the screen and covers the lower portion of the swiveling screen mount in about that orientation. So the kit is comprised of the aluminum mount. It's pre-assembled, shimmed, bench tested to make sure that the tension in both axes are correct. The three-piece plastic cover, the dash portion, the screen portion, and then the temp sensor mount. Move that out of the way. Which the temp sensor mount mounts to the underside of this component here, underneath the dashboard. So that's the kit. Also, I'd like to say that a number of people have asked, what about the Chinese mount? How does my mount differ from theirs? There's one key difference beyond the fact that they're infringing on my patent, and we're looking into that. My attorney's looking into that right now. But my mount has a separate left-right pivot point and a separate pitch angle pivot point. They are separate pivots for a couple of reasons, and that is to prevent the screen from tipping left or right and to hold it level. So when you swing the screen left or right, pitch it forward and back, the top edge of the screen, the top and bottom edge of the screen stay perfectly level. That was extremely important. This angle, to keep this plane horizontal, that was critical. And the Chinese mount uses one knuckle that allows left-right swivel and forward-back pitch, but it's got slop in it, and the screen, you try to pitch it and it angles. So we went to great pains to make enough room within the area that we had to allow two separate pivot points. There are also different pivot points because the pitch angle needs to be stiffer than the swivel angle. I found that once you get the pitch angle where you like it, you tend to not move it. But you still want to grab the corner of the screen and swivel it without it changing the pitch angle. And the way to do that is to make two separate pivot points. And therefore, we ship this mount with the pitch angle pivot about 30–40% stiffer than the left-right swiveling pivot tension. That way you can swivel it left and right without changing the pitch angle, but if you want, you can grab the screen and change the pitch angle, but it will automatically want to stay in that pitch position. So when you swivel it left and right, the pitch angle stays consistent. So a very unique feature of our mount. It's extremely heavy duty, CNC machined out of billet blocks of aluminum. And we're really proud of this. A lot of time went into developing this mount as well as manufacturing each one. A lot of time went into the cover. Believe it or not, it took more time to develop the cover than the mount. And that's a whole nother story altogether. So you can see by the video, I went through quite a number of challenges in that along the way. I now have this current the Atlas mount that I'm calling it. Our latest iteration is not only patented, but the name is copyrighted as well. And I'm very proud of it. The new mount is shipping with the plastic cover, and we've shipped probably a dozen or so, so they are already in customers' hands. If you have a mount kit that's on order, I know we were, oh my goodness, almost 4 months behind in shipping. That is being caught up very rapidly, because as of right now, this new design is easier to, I don't want to say easier to manufacture, but the orders are easier to fulfill. That's a bit of a sort of a side story there. But also, we have moved our production facility to a different location. All the order fulfillment is being handled at that location, and they are catching up rapidly. So this is the new Atlas mount. You can see the distance that it swivels. It does stop before hitting the dash, but it gets very close to the dash, but stops before hitting. The left-right swivel is smoother and less friction than the forward-back pitch angle, and that was done on purpose so that the pitch angle would stay consistent when the passenger swings it over to them. It is very solid left to right. There's no tilt. It stays perfectly level no matter what orientation you have it set at. And so at the the description of this video down below, I'll give a discount code, so you can go ahead and order a screen mount and get a substantial savings off the cost. These are 100% made in America, every single part. Nothing is imported whatsoever. All of my stickers even, and I mean a packaging, like everything is made here in America. We're very proud of that. So if you guys would like to support the channel, you want to go ahead and order a screen mount, there'll be a link in the description below for a discount code, as well as how to order the screen mount. Probably as of the shooting of this video, I bet we are about a month out shipping new orders that come right now, just because we have a backlog that we are, well, maybe less than that, maybe just a few weeks, but we have a couple month backlog that we're working through very rapidly. But we will be totally caught up and have them in stock shortly here. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. Thanks guys, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.